Welcome everyone to this webinar. For those of you who've been involved with the webinars before, you will know that this is a series which is designed to do some analysis for the CASA programme, a programme supported by the UK's FCDO. We're trying to find ways to support the commercialisation of smallholder agriculture in emerging markets. And we're aiming to find investors, investor-supported initiatives, and groups that have a direct impact on the investor climate for agribusiness, identify challenges, find solutions. So this particular session is around exploring 5 particular routes to profitable sourcing from smallholder farmers, investors' perspectives on the deal. And just as brief background, we know that 500 million smallholder farmers worldwide represent both a key supplier base and a market for firms. But how do investors perceive the smallholder sourcing business deal? The discussion is going to build on a recent publication by CASA's Technical Assistance Facility, which sought to map the landscape of investment in smallholder sourcing models, asking a range of different questions around, for example, what percentage of funding allocated by investors is to smallholder sourcing? What are their perspectives on commercial viability and development impact? What are some successful case studies and what are the challenges? And we're going to hear from some really excellent panelists around very practical ways in which they've engaged with these questions, as well as hearing more about the publication itself. Before we start on that, I wanted to give you a couple of housekeeping things. So we're going to be recording this session and it'll be available on the CASA website afterwards. Please do post questions in the chat. We'll come to them at the end of the time when all 4 panelists have done their speeches. And before we start, we wanted just to ask you 2 very brief questions to give a little bit of a sense of who's on the call and how much you are involved in smallholder farming or smallholder farming investment at the moment. So the first poll, which we'll do at the beginning of this session, and a screen will come up just now asking you those 2 questions. And then just before the end, we're going to ask you a couple of other questions. This is so we can provide feedback so that we can really get better at this and give what's needed to people like yourselves who are attending these sessions. So we're going to put up a slide now. It's got 2 questions. Please scroll down to the bottom of the box, answer both questions, and then press submit. The submit box should be red before you can submit your answer. So we'll put that slide up now, I believe. If you could answer those 2 questions. Firstly, has the organization you work for been involved in any investment programs or business operations that sourced inputs from small scale producers? And there's 3 options there. And then secondly, please tell us, there's various categories that best describe your organization. You'll need to scroll right down and give us a sense of where you best fit. And then as soon as we're done on that, we'll move to the panel. So we'll give a few more seconds for people just to give us your views. Thank you for those who've already been swift at voting, found your category. And have plugged in your thoughts. We'll give it a few more minutes. Hopefully not complicated questions this time. They're fairly straightforward. So we'll just give you a couple more seconds to give us your answers. I know not everybody will vote, but we want as many of you, please, as you can, giving us that to help us with the feedback. All right, and as I say, we'll do another poll at the end. Thank you for those responses. And we'll do another poll at the end just to get some very swift feedback at the end of the session. So thank you very much for doing that. We'll now move to the panel. And we've got, as I say, 4 really excellent speakers for our panel today. The first is going to be Melanie Machingawuta, who is a program director at TechnoServe and the team lead for the £8 million CASA Technical Assistance Facility. She previously managed the African Agriculture Fund, TAF, from 2016 to 2018, and has been facilitating inclusive economic development for several years. She's going to tell us first about the publication that she's done for CASA, and giving us a sense of what work she's been doing with investors to provide the information that we're looking for to inform the solutions to these challenges. Melanie, over to you.
Thanks so much, Alice. Hope everyone can hear and see me well. Very excited to share the key takeaways of the paper that we published in April this year. Just to quickly give a little bit of context, as Alice mentioned, this is a 5-year initiative funded by FCDO. CASA TAF is focused on making the commercial and development case for investing in agribusinesses that source from smallholder farmers, and particularly the role of inclusive technical assistance in strengthening upstream supply chains and supporting increased commercial viability, unlocking more meaningful, sustainable impact of these businesses. And we're doing this by providing technical assistance to 35 businesses in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, carefully looking to measure the results and capture learning to generate evidence and greater clarity on the sort of key conditions for commercial viability and success. Really trying to test a couple of hypotheses. Businesses sourcing from smallholder farmers are in fact attractive investments. Inclusive TA can increase volumes needed, increase business efficiency, and generate commercial value for investors, and that there is value in investing in this type of technical assistance. It helps to invest in the right business models and in the right way. So really trying to stress test those assumptions through the work that the facility is doing. So the paper that we produced is specifically focused on shedding light on the sourcing investment landscape and investor perspectives on this category of smallholder sourcing businesses. And we sought to quantify the share of investment flowing to agribusinesses sourcing from smallholder farmers, and spoke to 15 investors to gather their perspectives on the commercial viability and development impact of investments in this asset class. We were lucky enough to get the support of 4 students from the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, some of whom I think are on this call, which really helped us to, I think, capture some of the key issues objectively without sort of layering our own experiences and biases to the assessment. So really delighted to share some of the takeaways. Firstly, the quantification of that flow was quite difficult in itself, where we believe that there is opportunity for investors to more systematically classify and track smallholder sourcing agribusiness investments and really provide greater clarity on this asset class. And we think that this could really improve some of the guidelines on the blend of capital and technical assistance required to boost effectiveness. That said, out of the 9 investors who were able to provide data, we find that over 1/3 of the value of aggregated ag portfolios is invested in these types of companies that source from smallholder farmers. And overall, I think if I can reflect on some of the key takeaways, we see that investors saw great advantages and opportunities from sourcing from smallholder farmers from a commercial perspective, and incentives sort of ranging widely from access to greater supply volumes to cost savings on purchases and also accessing higher sales prices. Obviously with the caveat that the participants all sort of classified themselves as impact investors and some were also ag-focused funds. But we're seeing, and we saw through the interviews, that there's promising and increasing recognition that there is commercial opportunity here, but that there is a distinction between recognizing this opportunity and then actually realizing it, with a number of challenges voiced around the latter. So if I can sort of highlight some of the most common perceived challenges that came up, this was around securing sufficient quantity and quality of raw materials through efficient aggregation models. And investors also highlighted things like the key role of crop unit economics, the importance of upstream support services and trust-based relationships with farmers in making a smallholder sourcing model successful. So for example, on the unit economic side, a low margin grade trader is going to find it a lot harder to invest in sort of deeper services and tighter relationships with many farmers, compared to sort of a high margin horticulture exporter working with fewer farmers. So based on these reflections, we synthesized about 5 key takeaways for investors, agribusinesses, and development partners to support more profitable and impactful investments in this asset class. And beyond sort of the classification point that I mentioned earlier, we identified the need for more rigorous upfront analysis to really understand sort of whether the benefits justify the costs and efforts and what is really needed to operationalize and increase chances of success. And so in addition to that, we've seen how this can be really useful in pinpointing where private capital should be deployed and where public funding is needed. And that's sort of upfront analysis is being tested through TechnoServe's inclusive business plans, and also IDH is similarly using service delivery models to do this more effectively, and which Cara may talk about later on this panel. In terms of upstream support services to smallholder suppliers, this is really things like input finance, extension services, etc. Not necessarily being seen as a nice to have anymore, and this is where that sort of upfront analysis is really important to sort of determine how much is possible to invest in these services and in these relationships upfront. We also heard around the need to create more flexible investment vehicles that allow for longer term horizons and sort of appropriate deal structuring. You'll hear a bit more from Ed as he talks about his perspective. And finally, I think the last point was around sort of the need for more robust impact measurement and cost-effective systems to collect data to really demonstrate that value and drive more effective decision-making in future. So we're going to hear all of this from the investor participants themselves shortly. What incentivizes them and discourages them from investing in this asset class? Why do the proponents do it? What stops the skeptics? And really hear directly from them, and hope to use these insights to get smarter about the evidence that we generate to influence more investors to invest in these types of businesses. And importantly, this type of TA to ensure that we're sort of investing in the right models and where it makes business sense. And when we say sort of business sense, it must stack up for the farmer, the business, and the investor for this to be sustainable and successful. So I think an interesting sort of reflection was that there was also sort of an underlying notion that development impact is often seen as being in tension rather than in service of commercial objectives. And we noted that sort of whilst many of these 15 investors were moving away from this idea, we have yet to present enough examples of truly win-win cases. And so, you know, investors need a critical mass of profitable, inclusive sourcing examples to ensure that there's sort of a path to scale and exit. And for public funders, they want to see evidence of more meaningful development impact to support further funding of these initiatives, and where that subsidy is really needed. So from our perspective, routine technical assistance provision and impact monitoring can really help to build the pipeline of these scalable sort of examples and smallholder sourcing businesses, and we hope to add to the body of evidence for this through this paper and the series that will follow it. So yeah, looking forward to sharing some of the insights through the panelists directly. We've intentionally set up a slightly controversial panel, as we hear from, as I mentioned, a proponent, a skeptic, and a fund that's set up to address precisely these issues. So hopefully this gives you a window into our world as we grapple with and respond to these perspectives and gaps towards influencing more investment in technical assistance and this asset class. So back to you, Alice.
Melanie, thank you very much indeed. If you want to see the report, it'll be on our website. Already is on our website, and the link is in the chat if you want to download it now. It'll be also connected with the YouTube video when that goes up on our website. But thank you so much, Melanie. That was a really good summary of the report. And as you say, we're now going to talk to a number of people who are trying to make this work in practice. The first we have as panelist is Marcel Neutel, who is the managing partner at Capital 4 Development, C4D Partners in Indonesia. C4D Partners is an impact investment fund manager based in the Netherlands with investment offices in India, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And Marcel has extensive on-the-ground investment experience in Cameroon, the Philippines, and Indonesia. So Marcel, over to you to talk about some of the practical things that Melanie and her report have uncovered.
Yes, thank you very much for this introduction. And it was also great to hear Melanie talking about that report, and we were happy to be part of it as an investor, give our inputs, and also learn about the outcomes. I think a lot of things that we see in the report really resonates with, let's say, the realities in our lives as an investor. Yeah, we are. My name is Marcel Neutel. I'm a partner with Capital for Development Partners. We're an impact investor based out of the Netherlands, but we really work out of the countries where we operate in, where we invest in our portfolio companies. Today, those countries are Indonesia and India, and we have existing portfolio in the Philippines, Cambodia, and Nepal. Before we were working off the current fund, we were actually a global fund manager, and one of the issues we faced is that we were so dispersed. It was actually really difficult to build up strong relationship with our portfolio companies. So we really decided to focus and narrow on two geographies, which is Indonesia and India. I'm based out of Jakarta, and our investors in our fund. So we manage the Capital for Development Asia Fund, which is an impact fund, and our investors are a number of development finance institutions and some impact foundations. As an impact investor, the impact that we aim for is investing in growth SMEs that have a very strong positive, let's say, socioeconomic impact on underserved communities, which naturally often is in the rural areas. And in the rural areas, you see a lot of agricultural activities. So over the years, we have, I would say, developed ourselves specifically in Southeast Asia as an investor investing in agribusinesses. Next to, let's say, the impact angle on investing in through SMEs in underserved communities, we also, as a fund manager, have committed to invest at least 30% of our capital in women SMEs. So we have a pretty strong gender lens profile, which is currently to date we've actually invested over 60% in women-led businesses, which is I think something that we're quite proud of. In our portfolio, we at the moment have 23 companies, of which around 55% are in agribusinesses or agri-related SMEs. Most of them are into exports, and some of them are actually also sourcing from smallholder farmers and serving domestic markets. Some of the commodities that we currently have in our portfolio is cinnamon, rice, spices. In the past, we were also working with companies that were sourcing coffee and cocoa. In the next few minutes, I would like to talk about why we invest in agribusinesses and why we see this as an opportunity, and where the opportunities are and some of the constraints and challenges. And I will wrap up talking about the strategies that we build from our experiences to as an investor ensure that we're actually investing in growth and sustainable businesses, and how we are supporting those businesses. Why are we investing in these type of businesses? Again, because of our impact nature of the fund, we believe that we have the ability to invest in these agri-SMEs and reach into the rural economies. These rural economies are often driven by agricultural activities. And that's very much linked to market opportunities that we see, global market opportunities, but also market opportunities in the markets where we operate. There's a growing need for more transparently and sustainably sourced products. And quite a number of commodities, you simply find them in, let's say, the family settings. They're grown in family settings, and hence you have to work and deal with smallholder farmers, which require strong SMEs. What we see is that these SMEs, the right SMEs, they play a strong role in terms of creating that value for them as a company, obviously, but also that value for smallholder farmers. And what we also see is that though there's a lot of good companies out there, they struggle to really grow beyond, let's say, the financial abilities that they have themselves. because of lack of access to capital. And that's where we also, try to play a role in providing different types of capital to enable that growth. Yeah, we don't just do that through funding. It's obviously an important element of our work. But we also do that by providing these companies access to networks, knowledge, and different ways of helping them to become successful. Moving over to, let's say, the opportunities that we see. As I said, it's really as the global world is increasing connectivity and growing markets for sustainably and transparently sourced agricultural products, and that needs to be organized. And we see that these SMEs, the right SMEs with the right entrepreneurs, can do that. And for us, it's about identifying those entrepreneurs that can connect these farmers to their markets, go beyond, let's say, the traditional way of sourcing, working with intermediaries, maintaining, let's say, low value add to their products, but working with these SMEs that go deeper with these farmers and provide support and provide the access to these markets. And I think from just an example, what we see in our portfolio is for instance, in the cinnamon sector, whereas for a long time, the largest cinnamon buyers would not set a foot, for instance, in Indonesia and really be bothered about how the products are being sourced. Whereas today, when I speak to the entrepreneur running this company, he's having multiple meetings. And before COVID, obviously, these buying companies would actually come all the way out to Indonesia and to very remote locations to better understand where their produce is coming from. So this is a trend that we see in the market, and where these SMEs can really tap into. But ultimately, there needs to be translated, and there needs to be value in that approach. So the markets need to be willing, and they should be willing to pay premium prices, because working with smallholder farmers, let's say transferring some of the value towards these farmers, doing value add also comes at a cost, and that should be recognized. So it's not let's say, a simple game and a simple opportunity you can identify. It starts with the market, where the market is willing to pay some premium. And then another example that I have from a portfolio company, it's not so much in agriculture, but in the fisheries sector. They are doing a great job working with small fishing communities, sourcing in a responsible way, all kind of conservation programs around fishing in sustainable ways, maintaining the oceans. But there is not, at least at the moment, there's not a good labeling program or certification program to actually certify that. And then in the markets that they serve, usually it's very difficult to capture a premium. So ultimately, their margins remain low, and it's a very long-term game. With let's say a long horizon, looking at these markets and working in these markets, and ultimately expecting that the market would pay that premium to justify those costs. When it comes to, let's say, the constraints that we're seeing as an investor, obviously there's a lot, but I like to focus on 3 constraints that we are seeing. One is around the relationship with farmers, one is around cash, and another one is around quality and quantity of produce. What we have seen is that the SMEs that source from smaller farmers, it's usually around large numbers. You need to organize those farming communities, and there's existing structures in place. There's existing middlemen, there's existing players in the market that have the funding to do, let's say, crop finance or seed financing. And all of that, as an SME, you need to take care of, because once the harvest is there, you need to be ready to buy the produce, and most often, especially in the early stages of a relationship with the farmer, the cash basis. You also see that middlemen have a very strong position in the supply chains, so it's not a matter of simply cutting them out. Quite often, you have to really work with them. We also see that these kind of mechanisms don't play a positive role in, let's say, transferring value towards these farmers. So as an SME and as an investor, when we look at our SMEs, our potential SMEs, this is something that we try to understand really in depth. How are they building up the relationship? What's the balance between trust and contracts? You can't do everything on trust. You can't do everything on contracts. That balance needs to be very clear, and we try to understand how these SMEs are putting that in place in their context. Yeah, and simply from let's say an investors or cash point of view, is that the SMEs, the companies that work with smaller farmers, need to at all time have good cash management to be able to source at the right moment, source at the harvest periods, which obviously cannot be done at let's say credit terms in the early stages of a relationship with farmers. We see a lot of things going wrong there. Is that for a long time, this value chain or the supply chains have been developed, promises are made, and then when the moment is there, for one or other reason, the company is unable to actually bank on the promise and buy the produce. So the farmers end up still having to work with the with others buying their produce, and not at the price that they were hoping for. And then lastly, on quality and quantity, when sourcing from smallholder farmers, there's obviously a large diversity in terms of quality, and markets require standardization. So that has to be organized by the company as well, again. And what we see is that quite often as a company, you have to decide to actually take in, for instance, all the produce, not just the produce that you can sell to your customers, also the produce that are below, let's say, your grading standards, which also require you to be creative and find markets for that, because farmers often don't, let's say, lack the motivation to work with multiple buyers.
Marcel, so I think that's really great. Thank you so very much. That's tremendous. And we'll come back to some of those questions again. I mean, particularly around the points about needing quite a lot of work up front to be able to make these things work, and the constraints that need to be ironed out early on if we're going to make these things work, which points to that premium you were talking about, but also perhaps the need for TA and patience and the support that's required. But thank you very much. We'll come back to some of those points in the questions. And I wanted to move on to Edward Stiles. Edward has worked in African agriculture for many years. He lives in Zimbabwe and works for Maris, which is an investment holding company with operations in 5 sectors, including agriculture, across East and Southern Africa. He's a director of several agribusinesses, including Wakalima Tea Company, which many of you will know grows, processes and exports tea from Tanzania, and has 80% of its tea coming from 15,000 smallholder outgrowers who are also shareholders in the company. And Ed's particularly going to talk about some of the challenges that he sees, and particularly around where are the advantages, where are the sort of incentives for investing in smallholder finance sourcing businesses, for smallholder farmer sourcing businesses. So Ed, over to you.
Great, thank you very much for the introduction. I would first like to sort of touch on sort of 2 of the fundamentals that I sort of consider with our businesses and with new businesses that we're looking to invest in that source from smallholders or are considering it as an option. And the first part is economics, and the second part is sustainability. And they're not exclusive; they very much sort of operate together. So on the economics point, like fundamentally, can the smallholders produce a quality product cheaper than I can do it, or the commercial component of the operation can do it? And the key word within there is around quality. And so with our tea business, Wakalima Tea Company in Tanzania, which you touched on in the introduction, our network of 15,000 outgrowers absolutely can produce green leaf tea to an excellent quality, which they then deliver to our factories, which we process and then export as made bulk tea into the international markets. And this system works very well. The smallholders are effectively part of a cooperative, and they also own 30% of the company. And so it's very much in their interests to produce a quality product, to sell it to us. And I suppose like the advantage that we have in tea as well is that it's very, particularly as a green leaf, it's very bulky and needs to be processed. And so the options for side selling to a briefcase trader are very limited as well. But that quality component is a key consideration in other crops. And so in a similar part of Tanzania, I also sit on the board of Rungwe Avocado Company, and this company has sourced avocados from thousands of smallholders within the area. But one of the challenges we face there is very much around the quality. And so there's no sort of further processing that's happening with your avocado before it gets shipped, other than sort of grading and packaging, before it gets shipped out of the country and sort of hits the supermarket shelves across Europe. And so the consumer may well like the sound of an organic avocado, maybe the fact that it's been grown by a smallholder, and so the impact that they can have buying this avocado is going to sort of trickle down and really be sort of meaningful to somebody's livelihood in a less developed part of the world. But the sort of romance ends very quickly if you cut the avocado open and have to throw it away because it's of a very poor quality. And to grow something like an avocado is to a high enough quality standard is a very difficult thing to do, and requires a lot of technical know-how, requires proper inputs applied at the right time, and then you only have sort of one shot in the year when it's time for it to be harvested, and it needs to go then. And so it's a very tricky thing to get right, and then trying to explain to the smallholder in Tanzania or elsewhere in East Africa that actually someone in a country on the other side of the world that you've never heard of is producing a lot more avocados at this time of the year than anticipated, so you're getting a lower price, is a very difficult thing to do as well. So there's various different sort of considerations there around the economics, and comes back to that quality point, and the price. And ultimately, if the quality is there, but the price from sourcing from the smallholder is higher than one can produce commercially, is the market going to pay a premium that would justify us passing that or having to absorb that cost as a business? Another sort of consideration within that, which pushes up the cost, as I alluded to with the tea, is around like this sort of around side selling. And so if one wants to grow a quality product or support smallholders growing a quality product, then you do need to, as I say, bring the technical assistance, potentially finance the inputs. And this can become a very sort of expensive venture if you don't see the product coming back to you. And it's very difficult to enforce with contracts, and is one really going to take sort of smallholder farmers to court, and becomes increasingly difficult when you look at some long-term crops. And so take macadamia nuts, which might take sort of 5+ years to come into production. What you've done in those sort of 5 years supporting the farmer can quickly be forgotten when somebody turns up a week earlier than you and is prepared to pay cash and potentially a marginally higher price, because they don't need to recoup any of their costs in order to buy the product. So that's some of the considerations around the economics of working with smallholders. Then the second part is the sustainability piece. And we are very much committed to working with our communities within which we operate. The community and very much key stakeholders with our businesses, and they provide a license to operate, often the labour that work for our businesses, and we want to be a responsible sort of corporate citizen and work very closely with them. So we like to, in addition to providing quality jobs and certainly doing no harm from an environmental and social perspective, like to look at the opportunity to improve livelihoods. So for example, I also sit on the board of Equatoria Teak Company, which is a sustainable teak plantation in South Sudan. And we recently came to the end of our harvesting cycle, and we're now in a development and expansion phase. At our peak, we were employing over 1,000 people, the largest employer in the state. And but that's no longer the case, as I say, since we've moved into this different phase of for the business. And so what one could have done would be to just sort of put up the fences, recruit a few more security guards and watch the trees go. But due to this long-term commitment that we have had and continue to have with our community, we wanted to do much more than that. So we've started a coffee project which will improve livelihoods for over 1,000 smallholder outgrowers, and particularly with an emphasis around women and youth. So this will help sort of alleviate some of the shortfall in employment opportunities that we have been providing. Again, like a key component to this is that coffee is potentially going to be, or is going to be, a crop that works well in that area. The logistics are extremely challenging, and it is a long-term investment. And this then sort of brings me on to the sort of next part to more directly answer your questions about sort of like the structure of what's sort of needed to incentivize.
Just briefly, if you could, Edward, that'd be brilliant. Just quickly, we're running out of time. We've got some good questions coming in, so apologies for moving you on, but just quickly cover that. That would be wonderful.
Problem. Yeah, so it's appreciating there's a it's a long-term horizon to these things. Like often there is not even the knowledge about like how to grow a particular crop, and so this might be supported by government institutions or universities or whatever it might be in other parts of the world. But certainly in many countries where smallholders operate, particularly across Africa, the private burden is within the private sector. And so it then comes down to then one has to learn how to grow the crops, get the commitment from the communities, then implement the project. And this then also takes a long time for the crops to grow. And so one has to have a patient approach and the right partners to come in who can help share the risk alongside the private sector.
Absolutely, so key to have that risk sharing of the public and private sectors, or the impact investors and other investors being able to share that the risk and the upfront costs, I suppose, of making these things work. That sounds like such a massive takeaway from there. Edward, sorry to have rushed you through that last bit, but I know we will come back to you in the questions, and I just wanted to make sure we have time for those questions at the end. So, Cara, I wanted to come to you finally with the FarmFit Fund, our final panelist. So Cara, as I say, works for the FarmFit Fund. She's investment manager at IDH Investment Manager BV, which is the manager of the FarmFit Fund, which she'll tell us a bit more about as a blended finance fund to catalyse commercial investment into agricultural value chains and unlock the provision of long-term financing to smallholder farmers and agri-SMEs. So, Cara, over to you, and then we'll come to some of the great questions that are coming on the chat. Cara, looking forward to hearing your intervention.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you so much for having me. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me clearly. And just thank you for the opportunity to be on the panel. Thank you for including us in the report. Congrats on a great report. We really enjoyed it and enjoyed reading it. So I will focus on some key drivers for commercial viability, how the fund is positioned within that, and some examples. We've tried to make it quite applicable to highlight and echo some of the factors included in the report and one or two others. So For the IDH Farmfit Fund, we analyze every potential investment based on its own merit, of course. So each vary within their sourcing structure, the business model, which is influenced by geography and also the crop. It is therefore key for us to understand the primary business objective and the opportunities and barriers within that. The type of farming models used, the crop type, and also the enabling environment. And what I mean by that is the market dynamics at play, the institutions involved, and also the assets available and the infrastructure that exists. And then through our existing completed deals and also the pipeline within our investments, and importantly, the learnings we've received from IDH Farmfit within their SDM analysis work that Melanie mentioned, we have some key levers that drive productivity and profitability, leading to this commercial viability and impact that we're after. So the first one for us is really understanding and knowing your client. In this case, it's the farmer client that we're referring to as a key lever. So tailoring services based on farmer needs, for example, addressing specific challenges that they may face, such as including women or combating climate resilience and food security concerns is key. Knowing what our client needs and providing that increases the likelihood of adoption, which leads to results in cost reduction and increased impact. So that's one of our first levers. The next really is creating these holistic service packages. So providing basic services packages such as training and inputs, which is most often finance, is great, but where we see it's really commercially viable, it's where impact is maximized and the package includes and addresses really the long-term needs of the farmer and also the household. So when that's done, it's more likely to break even and farmers are more willing to pay for complete service packages. Businesses can also provide additional services at a much lower cost by leveraging existing infrastructure. Other factors for us, or other levers I think worth mentioning is strategic partnerships. This is key for us in the IDH and also the IDH Farmfit Fund, where there really is a formal joint vision to create meaningful impact at a farm level. And then maybe a very obvious one that's been mentioned before is cost efficiency. And this can be achieved through a variety of factors, such as increasing economies of scale, through greater access to supply, reducing purchasing costs, and creating higher sales prices. And then this also relates quite closely to the crop unit economics mentioned in the report as a key success factor, which we definitely echo. And then importantly, securing the quality and quantity, which the previous panelist just mentioned, really is a key constraint. And therefore, we really see that as a commercial opportunity for us to overcome. And if that is overcome, it can be successful. And then lastly, also echoed in the report, and very important for us and really the focus of the fund is looking at long-term investment horizons and also the ability to scale and replicate. So within this asset class, it really takes time to realize the benefits. And scale links to the ability to reduce costs, provides key learnings to reduce risk, and really provides these valuable insights for us to then replicate in our new blended finance models for the future. So just moving to how the Farmfit Fund in particular looks at those levers and how we assess that. The Farmfit Fund was launched to provide a range of affordable financial instruments that we feel is currently missing in the market. We can provide from working capital to equity investments. And these products are available to pilot and scale new smallholder business models. So the fund takes the highest risk position in these transactions, really aimed at crowding in commercial capital. And the fund can do this because it has a first loss facility, which lowers the barrier for commercial finance to eventually step in and provide these financial products, which is really the aim of the fund. With every transaction finance, the learning and best practices is also shared, building a competitive smallholder finance market, which we feel everyone can benefit from. And linked to levers, the fund has the ability to provide long-term flexible capital and is able to de-risk both value chains and also financial institutions, which we really think is key for it really allowing additional volume and farm financing and is possible on a standalone basis. And financing therefore bundles these services and creates these holistic service model approaches that I spoke about. And it really enables the scale of sourcing to increase, which translates into increased quality. And then we really, as a fund, understand the opportunities that exist within the sector and the need to close this financing gap. And through the development of these new inclusive business models and crowding in both value chain actors and also in the financial sector, we really believe that smallholder farm financing can become a new investment class, able to invest in their farms as profitable businesses. So finally, to really catalyze additional commercial investment at scale, and to do so in the most efficient and market-oriented manner, we are also in the process of structuring a senior debt facility to act as a senior fund to the Farmfit Fund. And this senior debt facility will be the facility through which senior investors may participate efficiently in these underlying transactions of the Farmfit Fund on a commercial market basis terms. So these investors within the senior debt facility will benefit from 3 layers of protection from the Farmfit Fund, the DFI, which is the Africa Development Bank that we're working with, and the DFC. And then just lastly, just to make it a bit more practical, just to demonstrate how we've used it in some of our transactions, we're very excited that we've closed 2 investments, and the 3rd one nearly on the way as the fund has been launched and settled, and we can finally hopefully travel again soon. So our first investment was in Chocoa, which is a 1.4 million euro investment deal in Chocoa Fish Farm, which is a tilapia farm based in Mozambique. And the investment will take the form of a convertible loan, which will enable Chocoa to train smallholder farmers in raising tilapia fish in cages and ponds, and will allow Chocoa to expand its capacity to supply new farmers with fingerlings and feed. And at the same time, the investment will support Chocoa in strengthening its supply chain, creating a blueprint, hopefully that we think can be replicated within aquaculture in Africa. And I think what's key in this transaction was really the synergies between the IDH Farmfit and also the fund. So to put it into practice, first the IDH Farmfit team analyzed the opportunity for a smallholder program with Chocoa. Then the IDH aquaculture team supported Chocoa in implementing the recommendations. And now the IDH Farmfit Fund is investing in the smallholder program. And then our second investment, which will be in a fintech platform to provide rural microfinance institutions with a low-cost digital solution to help them automate operational processes efficiently, and thereby increasing their ability to service smallholder farmers. So I'll just leave it there. Hopefully that deal will be announced later this week, and I will hand back to you, Alice. Thanks.
Cara, thank you very much indeed. Really interesting to hear all of the things that you're doing. And I think all of the speakers have emphasized the importance of that support from patient investors and from different kinds of technical assistance. If all of these panelists would like to just put their cameras on, we'll turn to some of the questions that are coming through in the chat and try and touch on them. There's a lot of very interesting questions, some of which we just won't get to in the time we have available, I'm afraid. But what I wanted to ask a number of you, and we'll perhaps start with Marcel, is we've got some questions about the contracts that are made with smallholders, and I'd like to come to Edward as well on that. But the contracts around trying to avoid that side selling, perhaps, that Edward was talking about, but also giving visibility to smallholders. And I wondered whether you could talk to that in terms of in your own investments. Marcel, coming to you first, how you tend to manage that. Is it different with different value chains? What's the model that you tend to use?
Yeah, I think you're addressing is it different in different value chains? Yes, different countries. I think for us as an investor, we don't manage those relations ourselves. So what is really important for us is understanding how the entrepreneur manages those relations and the contracts. And there's a lot of variations. Sometimes you see that, let's say, group contracts work really well, where farmer groups hold each other accountable to, let's say, the agreements that are made. I think that's a model that in general, works well. What we also see is that once a company starts engaging, let's say, with new communities, new farmer groups, its initially is really driven around showing that you are there in the market, that you are buying the products at the agreed, let's say, or at least the agreed terms, basically. And it's very difficult to you can put a contract in place, but it's made basically meaningless. But over time, as the relationship matures, I think companies should get at a point where also the relationship with its farmers professionalizes is around contracts.
Thank you very much, Marcel. And Edward, coming to you, I know Wakalima Tea Company, for example, has shareholders. I mean, the smallholders are also shareholders. That's one way of keeping people engaged. Have you seen that working well across the piece? How do you deal with those contracts, those issues?
Yes, so it is an extremely difficult topic, and something I think about a lot, particularly with this like coffee project that I mentioned in South Sudan. It works very well in Tanzania. For a start, like the pricing of tea is that we buy the green leaf tea from the smallholders is fixed by the government, and we in fact pay a premium on top of that because we've forward sold a lot of our tea for the year already, and so we're able to work out our revenues and our costs, and some of this income can trickle down further to the smallholders beyond what the sort of minimum amount is stipulated by the government. So it works well for us because of the sort of nature of the market around tea, and also as I've sort of said in my original opening remarks. The smallholders have very limited options in where else to take the tea because of the processing facility that's needed and the bulk of the product. So yeah, and then that sort of final piece is exactly as you say around the sort of shared ownership model. They feel part of the business. It sort of builds to sort of one step further than, as Marcel was saying, particularly around like the community pressure and operating within a cooperative. So there's all of those sort of factors sort of align nicely for us, but it is an extremely difficult thing to do when pricing can fluctuate wildly, or assessments on quality are not made then and there, and it's may well be sort of at least a month or 6 weeks later when you know that your avocado's rotten, or whatever it might be. So very difficult, and comes down to those relationships. And if you're smallholder, they trust you that you're not there to rip them off. Maybe it can be a case if you can provide a small initial upfront payment, and then providing all goes well, you'll come back a couple of months later and give them a top-up payment depending on what the market has paid. But there's no silver bullet to it. If there is, please privately message me and let me know.
Yes, let's hope there is a silver bullet, but it's been looked for a while, hasn't it? But thank you for that. And I wanted to come to you, Melanie, with another question, which is about the role of donors in offering free or subsidized investment. The questioner is asking is saying that that's got unclear expectations as to commercial viability and return on investments, and to what extent that's a help or a hindrance to the impact investment sector. And I think we need to see that in the context of your report and others, which says actually it's very difficult to have commercial investment at the stage that you're talking about, and needs a lot of support at that early stage. But how do you view the role that impact investment is playing at an early stage, or donor investment is playing at an early stage? Does that help or hinder the future investments that impact investors or others might make?
I was chuckling a little bit to myself, because I think sort of when we look back to those hypotheses I was mentioning before, I do think, as I mentioned earlier, there's an increasing recognition that sourcing from farmers can be in fact an attractive investment, and that inclusive TA can increase sort of business efficiency, but not necessarily clarity on kind of how to achieve that opportunity, right? Or the support that's needed to really make the investments in the right business models, and sort of direct the technical assistance in the right ways. So I think sort of we're still in a place to sort of track back to some of the initial remarks that I made, where there is still a need for a critical mass of these profitable inclusive sourcing examples to attract more commercial investment into the space. And at the same time, we're wanting to be able to demonstrate the sort of development impact around this to sort of target public funding towards these initiatives in the right way. And I think if I can sort of maybe use the example of the upfront analyses like the inclusive business plans that sort of we're testing under the CASA facility, to really sort of emphasize the need to do robust analysis to quantify that potential value, and where it really does make business sense to invest in the right models, but also really map out what is needed, both to demonstrate the case for commercial investment and what sort of where public funding should be deployed. So we're finding that as a very useful tool to actually direct public investment in the right place, and avoid just being allocated for the sake of providing something.
Absolutely. And I think crucial to that obviously is being able to demonstrate or prove and improve the impact, isn't it? And we've got a question about how to measure the impact on smallholders. I'm going to come to you, Cara, very briefly with that question after we've just done this final poll. So anybody who can just very quickly answer these two questions that are going to come up now, asking about feedback on the session and whether the webinar's changed your attitude, and then we'll come back to the final question from the chat. There are a lot of questions in the chat we didn't get to, I'm afraid, but I think one useful thing would be to connect up on the CASA website. There's a lot more research, a lot more information, which perhaps would be useful also to look at. And I'm sure also the panelists will say that on their own websites and in their own material, there's also really useful information. So please do look at all of those things. So thank you for those who are voting. We'll just very quickly finish that. But I think while that poll is just finishing, Cara, just very briefly, and we've only got really 30 seconds, I'm afraid, so very inadequate, for just reporting very quickly on your impact management, your impact measurement in terms of how you do that. And I know it's a very difficult question to answer in 30 seconds.
No, that's fine. I'll give it a good go. So we work with the investee to come up with clear KPIs. So for the fund, it's very important to track both farmer reach, increase in income, and depending on the underlying investee, if there's a climate resilient lens, gender or youth, those will also appear in the KPIs. We'll work with them to track these KPIs, and the investee will report on them on a quarterly basis and annually thereafter. So it's very important for us to incorporate it as part of the financial milestones, as are the impact milestones. Hopefully.
Epic. Very good job in 30 seconds, and apologies for putting you in that position. You had to do that in 30 seconds. Many thanks. And there's some very good posts being made in the chat. What we'll do is we'll capture that in our final report on this session. So thank you for those of you who've suggested other potential places where people can look for some of the answers to the questions that have been posed. But I know it always ends up being an hour that goes much too quickly, and we only cover some of the ground, but obviously some of the reports you can go and delve into in more detail. Lots more to say about this, but I know the point about the need for quality, the need for the blend of impact and commercial investment seems to have come through very clearly in this talk, and the need for partnerships really between people who are looking for impact and people who are looking for commercial outcomes. I think it seems to be one of the key messages that appears to be clear in making some of these inclusive business activities really work. So many thanks to everybody who's joined, and special thanks to our panelists. And I'm sorry to have to whiz you all through this, but your insights were really valuable and much appreciated. And look forward to seeing everyone at other CASA webinars in the future. But thank you again to our panelists, appreciated. And thank you all for joining.